I don't think that home birth is necessarily the right decision for every single person, but if you did want to hear the dichotomy between a hospital experience when you want a natural birth and a home birth experience, maybe this helps you just kind of get a better idea of what those experiences could be like. I had such a fun time with my home birth, and I literally cannot wait to do it again. In a world obsessed with convenience and quick fixes, I'm approaching wellness differently. After healing from chronic illness by overhauling my entire life, I'm now on a mission to help women like me to thrive and not just survive. I'm Kristen, and you're listening to the OrganiMama Podcast. Okay, who else is confused about pregnancy? You know, that moment when you pee on a stick, scream a little, and then instantly start Googling, wait, what? What foods should I eat? Do I actually need to have a birth plan? And is it weird that my belly button is trying to escape my body? I would like to tell you about the OrganiMama's Guide to Pregnancy. It's like having that one friend who's done all the homework, but without the judgment. We're talking trimester tips, meal ideas, birth prep, ultrasounds, the glucose test, all wrapped up in one beautiful digital guide. If you want to go from I have no idea to yeah, I've got this, check the show notes, click the link, and grab the pregnancy guide. Podcast listeners can get 20% off with code PODCAST. Welcome back to the OrganiMama Podcast. I'm Kristen, and today I'm going to tell you both of my unique and very different birth stories. Hopefully this will be an encouragement to you. Maybe you're someone who is pregnant, going to have a baby sometime in the near future, or maybe you're just really interested to hear what my experience was. I had a hospital birth with my first and a home birth with my second. Both of them were very empowering experiences, but they were also very different from each other. So I'm excited to dive in. I'm going to be sharing more detail than I really have ever shared before. I wrote the OrganiMama's Guide to Pregnancy, which I will link in the show notes below. And I do spell out both of my birth stories in that guide, but I want to share a little bit more context to both of these scenarios that will maybe just round out the stories a little bit more. So let's get started. So my first baby was born in February of 2022. I was 25. I'm trying to remember. How old was I? 25 at the time when my daughter was born. And I actually had something during that pregnancy that is called overactive uterus, which is really just a fancy way of saying that you have a lot of Braxton Hicks contractions. And mine actually started around 18 weeks, which I thought was just a variation of normal. And what I really didn't know is that Braxton Hicks contractions that early in pregnancy are a sign of nutrient and mineral depletion. And I really had no idea about that. I was not drinking well mineralized or well filtered water. Honestly, at the time, we had like a really crappy fridge filter that we used for our water, and that was really it. So I was pretty much just drinking a lot of tap water that had chlorine, fluoride, and, you know, a lot of other like nasty stuff in it that didn't have extra minerals added back in. So I would say that my hydration game was very, very poor, and I wasn't using electrolytes during that pregnancy. So I just was probably overall pretty dehydrated and depleted in magnesium, potassium, and sodium. And so I had a lot of contractions that started around 18 weeks, and it went all the way up until the end of my pregnancy. And so I had, of course, as a first-time mom, you're really excited about having your baby, and you're hoping maybe you'll be one of the lucky ones that gets to have your baby before you get to your due date. Not like too early, but you know, sometime after you hit full term. So I had kind of convinced myself that because I had overactive uterus, my uterus was going to be so toned and ready that I was going to go into labor early. So when we got to 37 weeks in January of 2022, I had pretty much convinced myself that I was gonna go into labor. And so I was just ready. I was waiting at 37 weeks. I was like, okay, baby, let's go. It's time, girly pop. And time passed. I did not have a baby. I got to my 38-week appointment, and the midwife that I was seeing, I feel like I should back up and say that I was seeing a midwife group that worked in a hospital setting. So I would see these nurse midwives for my prenatal appointments. There was, I think, 5 or 6 of them that I would rotate between during my prenatal appointments. And then whoever was on call when I went into labor would be the one who would be there as I birthed the baby. So I had appointments with all of them. And the person that I happened to be seeing at my 38-week appointment was a little bit more medical, like conventionally medically minded, I would say, a little less holistic leaning than some of the other girls. And so at 38 weeks, she actually mentioned induction to me. And I was kind of very put off by that because I was thinking, no way, I'm going to totally go into labor on my own. And I'm not going to need an induction. And I'm offended that you're bringing this up at 38 weeks, which I don't think it's appropriate for a provider to mention induction at a 38-week checkup ever, unless you're having a medical emergency, If your provider is suggesting induction to you and is suggesting scheduling it several days or several weeks out, then it is not a necessary induction. If you did not know that, if there was actually a medically necessary reason to induce, they would schedule you for immediately that day and not for a later time. So anyways, she mentioned induction. She was like, yeah, we can get you on the schedule for an induction if you want one. And I was like, absolutely not. I had been preparing the entire pregnancy for a natural birth. We did the Bradley method, which was amazing. I highly recommend doing the Bradley method during your pregnancy to prepare for physiological and unmedicated labor. It's a course that lasts for 12 weeks where you and your husband together learn all the different stages of labor, and you do a lot of practicing together for labor, where at night before you go to bed, you're practicing contractions. So your husband will either put an ice pack on the back of your neck or he'll squeeze your arm with a pretty strong intensity, and he'll time it to like the regular timings of contractions during labor. And then you practice relaxing your entire body from the top of your head all the way down to the tips of your toes. That came in clutch, which you'll hear about in a little bit. But the Bradley method was incredible, and I learned so much from it. And then I also read Hypnobirthing the Mongan method, which was great, like a great supplement on top of taking the Bradley method. So I felt very prepared for natural labor, and I highly, highly, highly recommend preparing. If you want to go unmedicated with no epidural, you need to prepare for it. You need to prepare like you would prepare for running a marathon. You're not just going to one day up and say, I'm running a marathon today, I'm going to make it all the way, because you probably won't unless you're a crazy person. So anyways, I was kind of mad that they suggested an induction at 38 weeks. But anyways, I brushed that off. I said, no, I'm good. And what we did do at 38 weeks though, is they asked if I wanted a cervix check. And I was so eager to just know what was up with my body that I agreed to a cervix check at 38 weeks. It was legitimately the most uncomfortable thing I have ever experienced in my entire life. And they're taking their gloved hand and stuffing it up in your vagina and then putting a finger up into your cervix to try and see how dilated and effaced it is, meaning how open and how soft it is, and thinned out. And she said, you're not dilated or effaced at all. And I was like so discouraged. But what I should have known better than to ask for a cervix check at 38 weeks, because the truth is that your cervix does not give a rip about your mental health. And your cervix can either go from 0 to 10 centimeters dilated in the blink of an eye, or it could take 6 weeks to go from 0 centimeters to 10 centimeters. So that really is no indication of how close you are to giving birth. In fact, I know people who had their cervix checked around 38 weeks and they were already like at a 6, which in some places is considered active labor, and they didn't have their baby for another 2 weeks. So you just never know. And I don't recommend cervix exams unless it's like medically necessary, which is almost never. And it also increases your risk of infection or your water breaking, which means that you're suddenly on like a 24-hour clock to birth your baby, or else you're at a very high risk for infection. So all that being said, I had a cervix check at 38 weeks. It was very discouraging. We went home. I was expecting to have the baby that week. It did not happen. We got to 39 weeks. I saw a different midwife for my appointment that week. I asked for another cervix check and she was like, you're maybe at like 1 centimeter and like 20% effaced. So again, super discouraging. I was like, that has to change by the time I get to my due date. Well, guess what? I got to my due date, 40 weeks, and we went in for the appointment. Now, at this point, I was thinking, what the heck is wrong with my body? Because I have overactive uterus. I should have had this baby already. And also it was really discouraging because I was following multiple influencers on Instagram who were due like the same day as me. And literally all of them had 38-week inductions and had the baby already. So that was what I was comparing to, which I highly recommend just unfollowing anybody who's due around the same time as you, unless you have a really healthy understanding of the flexibility of due dates and how it's more like a due month or something, a due between 2 months even. Due dates are not set in stone. Our bodies do not know what a due date is. They just know that when it's time to give birth, they will do it. The body will give birth when it's time, and they don't give a rip about due dates. Anyway, okay, so on my due date, we go in to see the midwife, and they said, we can do a membrane sweep today. And I was like, that sounds great. I want to do whatever I can do to go into labor without actually having to have an induction. So, note to self, a membrane sweep is a form of induction, or it can be a form of induction, and it's an intervention that can cause a cascade of other interventions. So would I do a membrane sweep ever again? I would absolutely not ever do a membrane sweep again unless I needed to give birth for some medical emergency reason and I was really trying to avoid a C-section. If it was between a membrane sweep and a C-section, I would do the membrane sweep. But I did not need a membrane sweep, and I still chose to get one, so that was my choice to make. But I really do regret it because it was just freaking uncomfortable and it was just such a mental game. So I had a membrane sweep, and then I asked my provider, I said, hey, what do you think about me taking castor oil? Because I've been reading about it online. I know that there's people who are super against it and say that it's going to cause the baby to pass meconium and then they're going to aspirate or they could die. But what do you think on it? And she said, actually, I would say that it's relatively safe if you're just taking this type of dose, which I think was like 2 tablespoons. She said, you could try it. She said, I wouldn't be comfortable with you doing castor oil earlier than 40 weeks, but because you are at your due date now, I'd be okay if you wanted to try it like later today or in a couple of days and see if anything happens. So I was determined. So we went out and bought some castor oil and we went home and I took it 2 tablespoons. And this was after having the membrane sweep, which I don't really think the membrane sweep did much of anything. Other than I had like a tiny bit of spotting, but I didn't really have any contractions from the membrane sweep. So I took the castor oil after we got home, and then I started to have contractions and they started to get intense and they started to grow. And I started walking in circles around my house because I know that like movement can help labor progress. And so I'm like literally like walking in circles around our tiny little house and having contractions, and they're getting stronger. And then my husband comes in and he's looking at it, the forecast, and he's like, hey babe, we're going to have a huge blizzard that hits in like 6 hours. If you're actually in labor right now, I feel like we might want to consider going to the hospital soon, because otherwise we might get trapped here and not even be able to make it to the hospital, because the hospital was like almost a 30-minute drive from our house. So I was like, all right, I'm going to keep marching around here and make this labor thing happen, and then we can go in. And it had really been in my birth plan to wait as long as possible before going to the hospital. But I just was so excited and eager and honestly just ignorant on what the whole experience would be like, that I had convinced myself that I was definitely in labor after taking the castor oil. And so sooner than I probably would have chosen if it weren't for the blizzard, we went into triage at the hospital. So we drove across town to the hospital, checked into triage. I said, hey, I'm in labor. I took castor oil and I had a membrane sweep this morning. I've been having contractions. And lo and behold, they put me on the monitor to watch my contractions happening, and they stopped. Now, if you know anything about physiological labor, you'll know that this is very, very normal for labor to stop, especially if you go to the hospital. This is a really common thing for women who go to the hospital too soon. Just the environmental change can actually keep your body from relaxing enough to progress labor, and then your labor can just cease. And that's what happened to me. And actually, I wasn't really in labor at all. It was just irritated uterus from the castor oil. And so they monitored me for like 2 hours, and then they sent us home. And I was literally pissed. Like, I was so mad. I was like, I just want to have this freaking baby. Like, I'm so over it. And I was hugely pregnant, massive, very uncomfortable, just an absolute grouch. I had horrible pelvic pain. It was a rough time. And I also was not working at the time. I was a full-time wedding photographer back then, and I was off for the winter season. So I had nothing to do at home other than just think about going into labor. And so we were going to the chiropractor. We were doing all the things. We were having lots of sex because I was, convinced that that was probably going to make it happen. And poor Nick was just like, babe, can't you just chill and wait for it to happen? And I was like, no, we need to have this baby. Get this baby out of me. And so, yeah. So then 40 weeks passes, the blizzard comes and goes. We get to 41 weeks. I go in and they want to do an ultrasound and a non-stress test. So I'm like, okay, sure. I don't really want a lot of ultrasounds, but at this point that's fine. So I get an ultrasound. Baby's looking great. My body's looking great. The amniotic fluid is looking great. Everyone's looking great. And I had another cervix check and I was still not any more progressed than last time. She was like, you're maybe at a 2, maybe. And I was like, you have got to be kidding me. I just want to have this baby. I've been pregnant for so long. And so we did another membrane sweep that time at 41 weeks. And I was like, surely this is going to do it for me this time. And sure enough, it did not. And I actually decided to take castor oil one more time because I was like, well, maybe my body just wasn't quite ready last week when I did it. So maybe I should do it again. So I took castor oil again. And this time it actually didn't give me contractions. It just gave me horrible, horrible stomach pain and then a bunch of diarrhea. Sorry, TMI. But I had a ton of diarrhea. I was like, screaming in the bathroom and Nick was like, are you having contractions? I was like, no, I'm having diarrhea. This is terrible. I'm never doing castor oil again. And guess what? My body just wasn't freaking ready. So yeah. So literally every night I would go to bed crying because I was so upset that I was still pregnant. And every morning that I woke up still pregnant, I also would just cry. And poor Nick, who was in med school at the time, was just going to class and being like, I'm so sorry, babe. Maybe today is your day. And then the next day would come and then the same thing would happen. And he'd be like, maybe today's the day. And it just wasn't happening. So we got to my final appointment, which was at 41 and 6. So I was one day away from 42 weeks. And we go in for another ultrasound, a non-stress test, and baby is looking good with movements, heartbeat, all of that stuff, and like hiccuping and all of that. But the ultrasound technician was looking at my amniotic fluid, and she kind of made a comment about like, hey, we'll just need to check with the midwife about this. And I was like, about what? And she said, well, I can't really tell you that much and I can't diagnose anything, but it looks like you might have a little bit too much amniotic fluid. And I was like, what does that mean? I don't know anything about that. What is that? And she's like, we'll just have the midwife look and then they'll tell you about it. So we go back into the examination room and the midwife comes in and she's like, hey, so yeah, we would consider you to have borderline polyhydramnios. And I was like, now what in the poly what? And she said, polyhydramnios is when you have a little bit too much amniotic fluid and it actually can pose a risk to the baby. And I said, well, what's the risk? And she said, well, polyhydramnios does increase the risk of stillbirth. And I said, okay, so what do you recommend? And she said, well, I would recommend that you actually go in for an induction because of how far you are gestationally right now. And, it's tough because I think that she really was just doing her job and was doing her best to inform me on, what she thought. But looking back, I didn't know anything about poly. I didn't know what my increased risk was. I didn't know what the percentage of risk was. I just knew that I was exhausted from being pregnant and super, super, super over it. And so I think just having kind of an excuse to go into labor was kind of what I was looking for. I was very psychologically weak at that point, having been pregnant for so long and just being so uncomfortable. So I think I was almost kind of relieved when she said, I would highly recommend an induction today. I think I was just kind of like, screw it. Let's just do it. I want to get this baby out. So we agreed to the induction, and looking back, hindsight's 2020. I think if I knew what I know now and I've been through what I've been through now, I would have declined and gone a few more days to see if my body could go into labor on its own. They also had a soft policy about not wanting a mom to go past 42 weeks gestation at that hospital. So I think that probably would have made them uncomfortable. And if I had wanted to go further past 42 weeks to 42 and 3, 42 and 4, I'm guessing they would have transferred my care to an OB instead of to a midwife because they wouldn't want to be responsible for that. Which is just, it's just different when you have a baby in a hospital versus when you have a baby at home. Because they'll tell you that your risk of stillbirth doubles by going to 42 weeks, but what they're not telling you is that it's zero, like your chance is less than 1 in 1,000 of stillbirth before 42 weeks. And after 42 weeks, it's 1 in 1,000. So it's like, it's doubling, but it's doubling at such a small percentage that it really is, in reality, in terms of numbers, it's making a very little difference in what your actual increased risk is of stillbirth. So all that being said, we started the induction, and we actually chose to start with an intravaginal pill called Cytotec, which causes uterine contraction. Cytotec, I think, is also used for like causing labor, like abortion, actually, because it causes the uterus to start contracting and can, you know, cause labor to begin at any point in pregnancy. I think. I'm not sure if that's what's still used, but I at least believe that that has been used in the past. Don't quote me on that. I'm not looking at anything on it at the moment. So anyways, they said, yeah, we would suggest starting with this because that might, if your body is almost ready to go into labor, then this might prevent you from having to go on Pitocin. And I was like, I'll do anything I can do to prevent going on Pitocin. I was reading a little bit on my phone right at that point about the risks of Cytotec. And so I was seeing, you know, there are some risks of uterine rupture and other harms, but it seems like a small risk. And if I can do this and not have to go on Pitocin, that feels like better than going straight to Pitocin or doing a Foley balloon, which is super, 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 super painful. And I really didn't want that. So I agreed to the Cytotec, and it's usually administered every 4 hours, and they just like stick it up into your vaginal canal, near this, they'll place it like this pill near your cervix. And so I was just like excited. I was like, I'm ready to have labor. I've been so prepared for this. I did my Bradley method. I've, you know, been practicing labor every single night with Nick. I'm ready. I'm just so ready to meet my baby. This is going to be great. And then the nurse who checked me in also kind of gave me some false expectations. And I was like, in your experience, how long do you think it's going to take before I have this baby? And at that point, it was like 1 p.m. And she said, you know, I think 12 hours you'll have your baby, like 1 a.m. I bet she'll be born by 1 a.m. I was like, sweet, I can do this. 12 hours, that's not too bad. So we start the Cytotec, and that was a 4-hour wait. I had some mild cramping, but nothing significant, nothing that was like any kind of predictable pattern. And so after that 4-hour dose, they were like, yeah, we're not seeing really any kind of like active labor happening. So I think we're going to need to go ahead and start Pitocin. And I was like, can I please eat dinner first? Because I know that here in this hospital, you guys are not going to let me eat while I'm on the Pitocin drip. And the reason for that, generally speaking, that they don't let you eat on Pitocin is because once you're on Pitocin, your risk for C-section is much higher. And if you have food in your bowels during a C-section, that can get challenging for the OB/surgeon. OBs are surgeons, if you did not know, for the OB who is doing your C-section. And so because they know that there is such an increased risk for cesarean sections, if you're having an induction with Pitocin, they don't want you to eat during labor, which this is not medical advice, but in my personal opinion, I think that is absolute BS because women need energy during labor for it to go well. And I think one of my biggest regrets was not sneaking in snacks while I was on Pitocin, because I literally did not eat the entire time I was on it. And that was a massive regret. Big difference between my first and second labor. So you'll hear about that a little bit later. But yes, so we started the Pitocin at 6 p.m. I ate dinner first, started the Pitocin, and we turned on Crazy Rich Asians because I was like, I need a good distraction. And this is a great distraction movie. And the nurse said, she was like, it's probably going to go kind of from 0 to 100 pretty quick in terms of intensity. And she said, we're going to start you off at 2 units and we can go all the way up to 10 units, but that's going to be like the most, and that would be pretty intense. So we're hoping that we be able to just start you on the lowest amount possible, and maybe that your body will just take over and you won't need much more than that. And I was like, cool, I hope so too. I don't want to have a lot of Pitocin. So she started me at 2, and as we were watching the movie, I definitely felt things start to kick in, like the contractions were starting, and I was like, this is a lot more than these Braxton Hicks I've been having for months and months. And by the end of the movie, so like 2.5 hours, I was not able to concentrate at all on the plot. I was closing my eyes and having to breathe through each contraction. And they came in and they were like looking at my contractions on the monitor, and they're like, these are not consistent or strong enough. We actually need to keep upping your dose. So every like hour or so, they were coming in, they were upping my dose of Pitocin. And as they were doing so, it was getting more and more intense and more difficult and exhausting. And yeah, so this was probably like, we're looking at like maybe 9 p.m. at this point. They've increased my Pitocin by a lot. Somewhere around midnight, I would say, was when I maxed, when they had increased me all the way to like level 10. I think, if I'm remembering correctly, it's been a couple years since it happened now, and it's weird how your birth experience kind of starts to fade with time. But basically, during the course of the night, I labored in a variety of different ways, but it was a very, very, very intense. And my baby was actually sunny side up. So I was having some back labor, and the Pitocin contractions are different than physiological natural labor because you're not getting the feel-good hormones that your body would be producing if your body was causing the contractions. When you have this synthetic oxytocin being pumped into your body to cause your contractions, it's just the contraction hormone that's flowing through your body. It's not the counteractive love hormones and feel-good hormones that are also happening. So you're just getting the intensity and none of the good parts of labor. And what was also different for me with my Pitocin contractions than with like natural physiological labor was that I was not getting breaks between my contractions very much. So I basically would have like 4 or 5 contractions back to back to back with maybe like a 5-second gap before the next one would start. And then I might have like a 5-minute gap where there was nothing. And this is really different than what you're getting with physiological labor, because in physiological labor, your contractions are going to give you a significant break in between each one. Now, you might have some that double peak where it starts and grows and grows and grows, gets really strong, and then starts to go down, and then it goes back up and peaks again and then comes down. But what's not normal during physiological labor is to have most of your contractions back to back to back to back to back with 0 break. And that's what was happening to me. So I wasn't really getting that like breather in between that I had been prepared for from the Bradley method. And so it was just like, I felt like I could barely keep my head above water. And I was like doing all of the things that we had learned how to do, relaxing every part of my body, low guttural sounds and breathing. We kind of quote unquote like moo through a contraction where you're like, moo, just like the most primal that you can possibly sound. And that's what I had to do in order to survive. And I had told Nick straight up, I was like, I will not get an epidural, and nobody's allowed to ask me if I want one. And I told my nurses and my midwife that I said, I will not have an epidural. Do not ask me if I want it. And if I even mention it, do not reply. Like, I do not want it. I'm telling you that straight up. And Nick knew that too. And so he really just encouraged me, like, you've got this, babe. And I never asked for it. I never even considered it because I had just planned that it was not an option. And I just knew in my brain, like, it's not an option for me. I have decided that it's not an option, so it will not happen. I'm very stubborn. I don't have a super high pain tolerance, but I am very stubborn. And I did train very, very hard for labor, and it paid off. But that doesn't mean it didn't suck, because it sucked. So anyways, middle of the night, maybe 1 a.m. or so, I asked for a pool to labor in, which they actually had portable birth pools that they could bring in for labor. You couldn't birth your baby in the pool, but you could labor in there. So I asked for the pool to be brought in. This like mechanic guy comes in as I'm like in the throes of heavy labor, like super loud laboring. He just comes in with his hose and like hooks up this pool, and he goes, "Here you go, ma'am." So I, like, in between, I had a little gap between contractions, and I was able to, get my gown off and get into the pool. And I literally sat there for 3 hours, just taking contraction after contraction after contraction. And I like barely moved. Having an IV was one of the worst parts because they had to wrap it with plastic wrap while I was in the pool, and I couldn't get it wet. So I had to keep my arm elevated, which was so so annoying and frustrating because I felt like it was very distracting and not in a helpful way. So I sat there and my hips were so sore. And Nick was, sitting next to me, massaging my shoulders, squeezing my hips whenever I asked him to. And finally, after 3 hours, the midwife came in and she said, "Hey, why don't we try changing positions? Do you want to go labor on the toilet for a little bit?" Now, if you didn't know, the toilet is nicknamed the dilation station because of the way that your body sits. It really can help to relax your pelvic floor and help your cervix to open up. And so it's a very common tool that's used by women in labor to go sit on the toilet, and it really can help your labor to progress. And so I agreed. I was very nervous to walk because of the amount of intensity that my contractions were. But again, I got a little break between contractions and I was able to move to the toilet, and I sat there for, I don't know, honestly, probably an hour. And at this point, my midwife came in and she said like, "Hey, this was maybe 3 or 4 a.m. She was like, can I do a cervix check?" And I said, "Yeah, but I'm not sure that I want to know." And she said, "Okay." So I said, "Can you do it quickly? Like I was like crying. Like I sound very calm as I'm describing this, but it was very, very intense." And so she said, "Yeah, actually I can check you right here on the toilet. Like, let's just wait until you get a break after the next contraction. And I'm just going to stick a finger up there and then check you." I was like, okay. And I was just running out of steam. I hadn't eaten in hours. I was barely even like drinking anything. I had not like given myself enough energy to go through labor well. And it was the middle of the night. I was exhausted, hadn't been sleeping well for weeks. So she sticks her hand up there. She does a little cervix check, and then she like walks out of the bathroom, and then I see her another midwife had peeked her head in the door right at the same time. And so I saw the midwife who had just checked me was standing like kind of across the room from me through the bathroom door. And she was like looking at the midwife who had just come in the hospital room, and she flashed her a number. And all of a sudden I was like, I want to know what I'm at. Cause I feel like I have to be like ready now. Like there's no, like, I was like, surely I'm like ready to push, because I was starting to feel a little bit of like pressure in my butt. And I was like, "What was that number?" And she was like, "Do you want me to tell you?" So, pregnant ladies, I heard you're making a baby registry. Congrats. Also, why are there 137 kinds of pacifiers? And why does every stroller review argue like a cage match? And what is a wipe warmer, and do you need one? Before you open another tab, hear this. The OrganiBaby guide breaks down exactly what's safe, toxin-free baby stuff that actually matters and what's just marketing noise. It's going to show you the best items to add to your baby registry, what to avoid, and how to make the whole thing way less overwhelming. So head to the show notes, click the link, and grab OrganiBaby. Podcast listeners can get 20% off with code podcast. And I was like, "Yeah, I do." And she said, "You're at an 8. And I think that was both discouraging and encouraging at the same time, because the last time I had gotten checked was probably at like 1 a.m. and I was only at a 5. And so I think hearing that I was at an 8 was encouraging, but at the same time I was like, that's still not 10, I still have a ways to go. And I did know that, you can go from 8 to 10 quickly, but I just was so exhausted. I was like, come on, like, why can't I just be ready to push this baby out? So after I was on the toilet for about an hour, I decided to move back to the bed. I was so exhausted, but I still wanted to use gravity to assist with the labor progression. And so they suggested that I sit up on the bed and have the back of the bed like fully propped up to like a 90-degree angle so that I could sit there kind of with my knees kind of open to the side so that my body was still upright and gravity was still assisting with me, but I could rest my back on the back of the bed without like reclining at all. And so that's what I did. I sat there and I just kind of took each contraction as it came. I was a very loud laborer. So every time a contraction was hitting, the nurse knew and Nick knew it was coming. And poor Nick was so tired because I had been making him squeeze my hips for like 8-10 hours at this point. Like it was so much on his part as well. And I was just like utterly exhausted. And I think at this point I maybe mentioned to my nurse or the midwife of like, hey, is there anything that's not an epidural that I could do? And she mentioned, like, laughing gas or something like that. And, Toradol. And I was like, nah, I don't think I want to do any of those things. And so, I just kind of kept braving the fire of the labor, and it was just, I was crying. I was struggling to breathe. Not like I was breathing, but like I was just breathing heavily. And I thought, this is the worst thing I have ever been through. And again, still not really getting breaks between contractions. So I just was kind of like drifting in and out at this point. I think I dozed off a couple times in between contractions because of literally how tired I was. And I had a couple times where I had some breaks. And I think my labor started to slow at this point a little because of how tired I was. And so they actually told me they needed to increase my Pitocin one more time. And I remember just like sobbing and being like, please don't, please. I cannot handle any more. And they're like, well, otherwise, like your baby's not, like, we need to get this kick started back up again. Like your contractions are spacing out too far. And so they upped my Pitocin again. And I just was, I've never felt so exhausted, overwhelmed. It felt like I was literally fighting World War III in my body at that point. And the clock kept ticking. There was a shift change that happened at 7 and a new midwife came. And there had been several midwives around. So there had been kind of 2 at all times. And one of the midwives, the one who had kind of been in my room the most, she actually wanted to stay past the shift change to kind of see how things ended. But another midwife came in, and at this point I had flipped around. So the bed was still upright at like a 90-degree angle. I had flipped around. I had draped my arms over the top of the back of the bed so that I could put my full weight onto the back of the bed, and I was kind of up on my knees. My legs were so exhausted from holding myself up. They were shaking, and I was just crying. And I remember writing down a couple days later, just saying that at this point, I felt like I was on an island completely by myself with no hope of rescue. And this midwife shows up, and she comes over to me, and she puts her hand on my back, and she whispers into my ear. And I don't even remember what she said to me, but she was so kind and encouraging. And she said, like, you can do this. You were born to do this. You were designed to do this. God is with you. And she saved me. She brought me back off of that deserted island and gave me the hope that I needed to keep going. And she said, look, I think you're really close. And I would like you to consider letting me break your water, because your water still hasn't broken. And I think if we break your water, things are going to pick up and your baby will come soon. So this was at like 7 a.m. And I was like, okay, I'm nervous to have my water broken. I don't want to increase the risk of infection. And she said, like, it's your choice, but I would really encourage you to consider letting us do that. And I said, okay. So I laid down on the bed, and I really, really did not want to be on my back. So they actually had me roll onto my side and put a peanut ball in between my knees, which was actually a really great position. And I ended up birthing in this position for both of my children, actually. So my body really likes being down and on its side, I guess, for pushing babies out. So I laid on my side. I put a peanut ball between my knees, and then she broke my water, and it was not painful. I was expecting it to be painful, but like almost immediately after my water broke, it like picked back up, and it was very intense. And then she checked me at that point, and she said, you are like at a 10, so we can push now. And I was like so motivated to get this baby out that I didn't really have like a very strong, all-encompassing urge to push, but I was like, if I'm at a 10, I'm going to start pushing. I'm going to get this baby the frick out of here. And so with all of my might, I pushed as hard as I could. I mean, I was screaming with each push. I could feel the intensity. I could feel the baby moving down, even with all of this Pitocin just coursing through my veins. I could feel her moving down. It was crazy and incredible and so powerful and freaking so hard. And so I was holding onto Nick's hand and squeezing it as hard as I could. And I was just like pushing, screaming, roaring. And it was an hour and a half of pushing. And near the end of the pushing, I could feel kind of the like quote unquote like turtling where her head was kind of coming out a little bit. And then after the contraction, it would kind of pop back in and it hurt. And I was getting discouraged feeling her head pop back in. And they said, actually, no, this is helpful because she's just very slowly stretching your cervix open, kind of getting it ready for her whole body to come out. And so then at one point, the midwife said, like, do you want to feel her head? And I was like, what? And they were like, she has hair. And I was like, no, I really don't. Like, I want to focus. I don't want to feel her head. And then Nick was like, no, you should feel it. And I like reached down and I felt the hair and I was like, oh, what? That's so weird. That's my baby. And so soon after that, I had one really big push and her head came out. And then, what was crazy is because she was sunny side up and I was on my side, my body just knew that right after her head came out, I needed to turn onto my back. I didn't even think about it like intentionally. It was just like, as soon as her head was out, my body was like, oh, we need to turn. And so my body just kind of told me to turn. So I flipped onto my back and that helped her pivot to get her shoulders in the right alignment. And then, one more contraction and I pushed with all of my might. Like, I'm sure everyone in that whole labor floor could hear me. I mean, I was so loud. I screamed her out and out she came. And then they lifted her up and they put her on my chest. And I just kept saying, hi, baby, we did it. Hi, baby. Hi, baby. It was the most beautiful, emotional thing. I could not believe that it was finally over. And yeah, it was crazy. So I had no perineal tear. I had a tiny like tear, not in my perineum. So my perineum was intact, which I'm super grateful for. And Nick got to catch her when she came out, which was just so fun. And we did delayed cord clamping. So we waited until the cord was white and not pulsing before we cut the cord. And then, I'll save like the whole postpartum story for another time in terms of breastfeeding and the golden hours and all the things I experienced postpartum. But what was crazy is that they put her on the scale, an hour later or whatever. And they said, oh my gosh. And I was like, what? And they were like, she is 10.5 pounds. And I literally could not believe my ears. I was like, 10.5 pounds. And they were like, well, no wonder she took so long to come out. She was huge. Like, your body was just like pushing out a massive baby. And it was kind of hilarious because during our like stay in the hospital after she was born, all of these nurses and like doctors kept coming in and being like, we heard that you had a 10.5 pound baby with an induction and no epidural. We wanted to meet you. And I was like, okay, this is kind of weird, but hello, nice to meet you. I did that. So yeah. And I think one of my biggest regrets or frustrations with that postpartum experience was that the only comments that were made regarding my daughter's size was just like, dang mama, like, way to go. That's crazy that you birthed a 10.5 pound baby with no epidural and stuff. But there was no comment really made about why she was that big. And so then fast forward a year and a half, I was pregnant with my second and I decided that I wanted a home birth. So we started seeing this home birth midwife that I had interviewed prior to getting pregnant and I knew I wanted to work with. And during one of our first appointments, I said, yeah, my daughter was 10.5 pounds. And she said, oh, honey. And I said, what? And she said, a girl of your body size should not be having a 10.5 pound baby. And I was like, what do you mean? Like, there's no comments that have been made to me about this. And she said, I'm sure you had a blood sugar problem that got completely missed. And that was news to me. So it turns out that she was right. And when I started using a glucometer to check my blood sugars around the middle or end of second trimester, I had really bad blood sugar numbers. Like my fasting levels were off, my post-meal numbers were off. And so I ended up going on to basically the gestational diabetes diet for the rest of pregnancy. And I told the midwife, I was like, I am willing to commit to this. And I said, like, what size baby would you like to see me have? And she was like, at least a pound smaller, like at least less than 9.5. And so, it paid off. I will preface and spoiler alert, the gestational diabetes nutrition plan paid off for me. And my second baby was much smaller. When I say much smaller, he was still large compared to other babies, but much smaller than 10.5 pounds. So, this time around was so much different. I just felt like after that first hospital experience, I was like, I never again want to ever have Pitocin in my body for any reason in labor. That was the worst thing I could have ever chosen to have happen, other than, obviously I didn't have to have a C-section and I was able to meet my goal of not having an epidural, but the Pitocin itself was terrible. And I was like, I just really want to experience physiological labor this time around. And so I was prepared to go to 42 weeks or beyond. I was like, my body, maybe it just has longer gestation and I need to just be cool with that. I asked my home birth midwife and I said, how long would you let me go until? And she said, until your baby's ready to be born. I said, so like 43? And she was like, oh yeah, whatever. Just we'll wait until your baby's ready and we'll just keep monitoring and make sure everything looks good and do kick counts. And we can send you in for an ultrasound if we think it's necessary, but like, we'll just trust that your baby will come when it's ready. And I was like, dang, this is different than what was said to me during my first pregnancy. So I was fully prepared to go to 42 weeks, which I think was a really helpful mindset. And I actually would encourage all first-time moms to have it in their mind that you are going to go to 42 weeks, because then if you do, you won't be disappointed. And then if your baby comes sooner than that, you'll be pleasantly surprised. And that's what happened for me. So I was just like prepared to go to 42 weeks. My due date for my second was actually right around the birthday of my first. Her second birthday and his due date were around the exact same time. So I was like, well, I just want to get through her birthday and then, he'll come at some point after that. So, we have her birthday when I was 39 weeks, and then 40 weeks come and I'm like, oh, hey, it's technically my due date, but I'm not expecting a baby anytime soon. I'm just chilling. I'm doing good. I'm just keeping up with my birth prep. I've been listening to the Christian hypnobirthing tracks, doing all the things I needed to do to prepare, focusing on lots of sleep and my nutrient dense diet, lots of protein to help my blood sugar regulation, lots of hydration. I had way fewer Braxton Hicks contractions the second time around because I was actually really focused on hydration and electrolytes and minerals and taking lots of magnesium. And I was just on top of things so much better the second time around. And so I woke up at 4 a.m. when I was 40 weeks and 5 days, and I had a series of contractions that were, enough to wake me up. And I thought, this is interesting. This could be something. And at this point I had no cervix checks, no membrane sweeps. My midwife had not ever even looked up there because she's like, it's not necessary. Like, there's no need to look at that prior to labor. Even sometimes in labor, it's not necessary. So I was totally cool with that. And I had said, during labor, I'm open to some cervix checks if needed, but I'm not like banking on having them if you're not banking on having them. And she was like, yeah, we'll just see what happens. But like, that's fine with me. So it was 4 a.m. I couldn't sleep. I was having some contractions. They were like maybe 5 or 10 minutes apart, still pretty spaced out, not super consistent. And I thought, I don't feel like I can sleep right now. So why don't I go take a shower? I'll get up, I'll eat something, I'll take a shower and see if that gets them to stop and calm down. So I took a shower. As soon as I stood up out of bed, they started coming more consistently, like every 2 minutes. Like I was in the shower and I was timing them and I was like, these are coming every 2 minutes. Like this might be it. And so after my shower, this was probably 5 a.m. I woke up my husband. I said, hey babe, I think I might be in labor. I've been having contractions like every 2 minutes as long as I've been standing here. And he was like, oh crap. Okay. And he was like, well, let's just take a little bit more time. Why don't you sit on your yoga ball and just kind of see if you can, eat a little something, drink some water, see if any of that like calms them down. And if not, then we'll kind of start alerting our birth team. And we had a birth team of a doula, a birth photographer, and then our midwife team, which was going to be my main midwife and then her assistant midwife. Or her birth assistant, I guess. There were two midwives that worked together, but it wasn't like a guarantee that both of them would be able to come because I think one of them was maybe off that day. Anyways, so contractions did not slow down. They kept going. They were getting a little bit stronger, but they were still consistently coming every 2 to 3 minutes. And so around 6 a.m., I called my doula and I said, hey, I think I'm in labor. She said, great, keep me posted. And then when you're ready for me, I will head your way. And then I called my mom at like 7 and I said, hey, I am in labor and I need you to come pick up our daughter and take her to your house because that was already the plan, was that she was going to come pick her up so that I could labor in peace and not be distracted by my toddler's needs. So my mom came over, picked up our daughter, took her back to her house, and we just kind of like had a chill morning together. Nick and I just like kind of cleaning up the kitchen, made some breakfast. I was taking contractions just kind of all throughout the house, sitting on my yoga ball, going into the kitchen. I was making sure to drink a ton of fluids, eat lots of snacks. I was eating a snack that contained a source of protein every 20 to 30 minutes for my whole labor, which was huge, so helpful. And so my doula showed up around 10, I think. And at this point, I was starting to have some contractions that I was needing to really like stop and breathe through, but I was still feeling like totally normal in myself in between contractions. And they were, maybe 3 minutes apart at this point. And so I texted and I had already told my midwife that I thought I was in labor. So at this point I said, hey, they're not slowing down. They're staying consistent. I think this is happening. And she said, all right, I need you to text me a picture of your butt crack. And I was like, excuse me. And she said, I want to check the purple line in between your butt cheeks and see like how dilated you are. And now this purple line thing is kind of crazy because some midwives like know how to look at this vein that appears between your butt cheeks, and based on how high the purple goes on between the back of your glutes and your lower back, they can kind of guesstimate how open your cervix is, which is wild to me. But I guess it has to do with like the cervix opens and applies more pressure onto that vein and therefore like makes the color darker and the line go up higher. So weirdest text I've ever sent. Nick has me bend over in the bathroom and he takes a picture of my rear, and then we texted it to her and she said, I think we're going to head your way. It looks like you're about 7 centimeters. And I was like, what? This is so crazy. And so, yeah, so around noon they show up. So the midwife, her assistant, and my birth photographer all show up around noon. And again, very common thing to happen. My labor stalled out. My contractions like stopped when they showed up. I was excited that they were all there. We had the birth pool like ready to fill up. And I was just like, oh my gosh, it's happening. And then my labor stopped. And then I started like gaslighting myself, being like, was this not it all along? Like, did I just get everyone to come to my house and it's not actually my labor? Like, do I still have a whole nother week and a half to go here? And so my midwife came into my room, like it was just me and her in there. And she was like, are you okay if I do a cervix check so we can just kind of see where you're at for sure? And I was like, that's fine. So most comfy cervix check of my life, like considering I had all of these cervix checks during my hospital, like prenatal experience and during my hospital birth that were so painful. She was so gentle and just so easy. And she felt all around in there and said, yep, you are at 7 centimeters, just like I thought. She said, I can actually tell that your baby's head is tilted a little bit and it's not in the most optimal position for birth, which might be why your contractions have stalled out, because his head isn't applying pressure on your cervix in the right direction to really like keep things going. And I was like, that is crazy that you could know that based on what you just did. But she said, I suggest that you take a nap. And I literally like blinked at her. I was like, what? Take a nap? Don't I need to be like moving and grooving right now to get my body back into action? She's like, no, I think you actually need to rest. Like if your contractions are slowing down, listen to your body. Your body wants to rest right now. And I was like, this feels like it would be a very different conversation if I was in the hospital. And she said, I'm going to suggest that you lay on your side with exaggerated side lie with your knee up. So like laying on your side with your knee that's faced, like the knee that is on top needs to be lifted up onto a pillow so that you kind of have your leg hiked up. And this will kind of help baby move into a more optimal position. She said, I'm going to set a timer, or I want Nick to set a timer, and I want you to flip sides every 30 minutes. So you're going to do lay on your left side for 30 minutes, lay on your right side for 30 minutes, and then back to your left side for 30 minutes. And then we'll reconvene and see where you're at. And I was like, I'm feeling pretty tired. I think I actually could close my eyes. And so I put my headphones in and I turned on my Christian hypnobirthing tracks, and Nick set a timer for me and I fell asleep and I had no contractions. And I could have been stressed thinking like, maybe this wasn't actual labor, but I just said, you know what? I'm going to trust that my body is doing what it needs to do. She already checked me and said that I'm at 7 centimeters. So something has definitely been happening. So I'm just going to rest and honor what my body is asking from me right now and see what happens. So I fell asleep. Timer goes off at 30 minutes. Nick comes in, helps me switch sides. I fall back asleep. And then I, one more time, switch sides again. And then after that was over, Nick brought me some food and some water and I ate it laying in bed. And then I got up, and as soon as I got up from that hour and a half nap, my contractions were back and they were consistent and they were intense. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is happening. And oh my gosh, my midwife knew what she was talking about. And oh my gosh, my body really did need a nap. And if I had been in the hospital, they would have not told me to take a nap. They would have put me on Pitocin because they would have said, your labor's stalling out. We need to keep it going. So that was crazy. And I just was so in awe of my body doing its dang thing. And I was like, what if we just trusted women's bodies to do the dang thing instead of deciding to kick in with these stupid interventions? Not that these interventions can't be helpful, because they absolutely can be helpful and they save lives. But are they always necessary the way that they're being used? I do not think so. So labor kicked in and it was strong. It was intense. They were coming every 2 minutes. They were growing in intensity. This was probably 2 p.m. at this point. And I was having to lean down and moan through every contraction. And I alternated between sitting on my yoga ball and walking around my room and sitting on the toilet. And it was intense, but I was getting these breaks in between every contraction that I had never experienced with my first labor. So I was getting a minute, sometimes 2 minutes, sometimes even 3 minutes of break in between contractions. And I was just like chilling. Like I was talking with Nick, I was talking with my doula, I was like chatting with my midwife, and it was just like fun. Like I knew exactly what to do to take each contraction. I knew exactly how to relax. I knew exactly how to breathe, how to moan through them. And then as it was over, I was like back to normal and just like talking with Nick and like eating a snack and just like laughing at something. And I had not experienced that before. Like I did not know that labor could be enjoyable, and I was actually having a great time. So then around, I don't know, maybe 4 p.m., that's when I kind of like hit transition and I was like, I need to get in the water now. So we filled up the birth pool and I got in the water, and that felt so nice. And the contractions were getting pretty intense at this point. Like every time I had a contraction, I was like leaning over the side, just doing everything I could to relax and breathe through it. And so I was in the pool, but then again, still between every contraction, I felt totally normal. And I was just like asking for food and snacks. And at this point, my birth team had migrated into my room. So they were all kind of sitting around. We lived in a really small house at the time, and I had a really small bedroom. So it felt like a little like cramped little party in there, but we were all just chatting. And at one point I had just finished a really intense contraction and I was like, that one sucked. I think there's a video actually on the internet that has gone viral, a reel that I shared of me saying that one sucked to Nick. And he was just like amazing. He just was so chill. Like he was just letting me do exactly what I needed to do. We did no hip compressions, like no hip squeezes this time, because I just didn't need them. I wasn't asking for it. I didn't need that this time. So I was just taking them all like how exactly I wanted them to. We had worship music playing in the background. I had my fairy lights on over my head and in underneath the liner of my birth pool. Like it was just such a vibe. It was so ethereal. And I had Bible verses like taped all over my room so that every place that I was laboring, I could just look at, meditate on scripture. And that was amazing. And just inviting the presence of the Lord into my birth experience was so wonderful. So yeah, and then there's like pictures of me from my birth photographer, like right around the time I was in transition, where I'm just like grinning at the camera, like cheesing from the birth pool. Cause I was like, this is so funny. And I remember at one point, I think my midwife checked me. I think I asked her to check me, or maybe she was like, hey, would you be okay if I checked you at this point? Cause things are starting to sound pretty intense. And I was like, that's fine. So I was in the pool. She kind of like reached her hand up in there and checked me. She's like, you're at 9 centimeters. She said, your water is still intact, but if at any point you feel pushy, you're welcome to push. Just trust your body on that. And I was like, okay, cool. So, I'm trying to remember exactly what happened, but there was one point where I was sitting there. I had just had a really intense contraction, and then everyone was just watching me. Like everyone was just sitting there looking at me. And I was like, so anybody got a joke? And then everyone just like started cracking up, and I was like, guys, I just want like some interact with me here. Like I'm doing fine in between these contractions. But then when they were coming, it was moaning, low guttural sounds. I was just like trying to relax as much as I could. And it was getting like pretty intense. But when she checked me, she said, yeah, baby is still turned a little bit. So I actually suggest that you turn on your side and like hike your leg up over the side of your birth pool, kind of similar position to how you took your nap earlier. And so with a little bit of help from Nick, I turned onto my side in the pool and I draped my upper leg over the side of the birth pool edge to kind of get that like, hiked up knee to really help open that pelvis. And sure enough, when I did that, the contractions got even stronger. And I was like, this is so much, like, this is so intense. But then as soon as the contraction was over, I was just like, oh, I'm fine. I'm good. And then I think there was one point where I had one contraction that was so intense, and I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. And my midwife came over and she just like stroked my hair and she was like, you're doing so great, mama. Like, I'm so proud of you. And I was like, okay, I'm good. I got this. And so then, I started to feel a little bit of pressure. And so I was like, this is like different kind of pressure than I felt with my first baby, because I started just with her. I just started pushing when they told me I was at 10. With him, with the second baby, I was like, I'm going to wait until I have the undeniable urge to push, because I do not want to do this like purple pushing where you're just like straining and straining and straining and your body is just not quite ready for it. I was like, I just want to wait until I cannot help but push. So I wasn't pushing, but I started just kind of like releasing my pelvic floor and like, I don't want to say like fully bearing down, because I wasn't fully bearing down, but I was just kind of like pressing, I guess, just a little bit, not pushing, maybe just pressing into the pressure a little bit. And it kind of took the edge off. And so I was like, all right, I'm just going to keep doing this. Like, I feel like I'm just gently pressing, into my pelvic floor muscles to just kind of like put a little more pressure down there. And during the contraction, when I would do that, it really just kind of took the edge off and it made it like a little bit more bearable. And so maybe like 4 or 5 contractions into doing this, all of a sudden I felt this gush. And then my midwife said, oh, your water broke. And then as soon as my water broke, I had the absolutely undeniable urge to push. Like if I couldn't have not pushed if I wanted to. And I like my voice, like I just let it out, and we have this on video. But like as soon as my water broke, it was just like instant. She goes, oh, your water broke. And then I was like, ah! And like, it just like, I could not contain it. I was like, he is coming out. And literally instantly his head was out. And then I was like, oh my goodness. And she's like, his head is out. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to breathe. I'm going to breathe. I'm going to wait until the next contraction comes before trying to push more, because that took so much of my energy just now. I'm going to wait. And so literally for 2 whole minutes, and it's crazy because we have this whole thing on video, for 2 whole minutes, I'm just sitting there laying down like on my side in the pool, and his head is just out. And my midwife, kind of like looked down to check. And I think she initially didn't really see him moving at all, but then he moved a little and she's like, okay, he's good. And what's crazy about babies born in the water is they don't have the urge to breathe or the need to breathe until their face actually hits air, because in the womb, they have the amniotic fluid. So they're used to being in fluid. So when they're born into water, because of the umbilical cord supplying them oxygen, they don't need to breathe until their face comes out of the water. So it's not a concern to have a baby's head just kind of chilling underwater in between contractions, because it's a lot of times it's better for your body to just wait until you have a contraction that comes to help you push and get the body out. And so the next contraction that came, I gave one big push and out came his body, and my midwife grabbed him and handed him straight to me, and I picked him up and I just started rubbing his back and saying, "We did it." And he started to cry, and it was just so amazing. And I just could not believe how enjoyable it was. Like, it was just so peaceful and fun. And I felt so in control, and my body had just done it the way it needed to do it. And it was like literally so much fun. It was intense at the end, but it was very fun and empowering. And like, I don't know. It was a completely night and day experience from my first, non-epidural labor, I guess you could say. And so, so they he was doing great. He was breathing. He was crying. Like, I delivered my placenta soon after that. And then they put the placenta in a bowl, because with him, they didn't cut the cord for at least half an hour. So they kept him attached to the placenta for a really long time. So they put the placenta in a bowl, and then they carried the bowl next to me so that I could carry him and get out of the pool. So I had people helping me. They had a line of towels going from the birth pool to my side of the bed, where there were puppy pads laid out, because I was obviously having some bleeding because I had just birthed a baby. And so after a little bit, maybe 10 minutes or so, I climbed out of the pool and made my way over to the bed and laid down and just got to snuggle with my baby in my own bed. And it was amazing. And we got to get breastfeeding established, and I got to go to the bathroom in my own bathroom, and they weighed him, and he was 9 pounds. And I was like, I'm proud of that. And my midwife was like, I'm proud of you too. 9 pounds, way to go. And I was like, that's small. And she was like, that's not small, but that's smaller than what you did before. So I'm proud of you for that. So it was just amazing. It was such a beautiful day. And because my labor happened all during the daytime, it started, I forgot to say, he was born just before 6 p.m. So my total labor was from 4 a.m. to 5:52, I think, like that. But, I had that whole hour and a half in the middle where I napped and had no contractions. So total labor was, about 12 hours or so. But yeah, I had such a fun time with my home birth, and I literally cannot wait to do it again. So Lord willing, in the future, I will get to have another baby, or maybe more than one baby at home again. It was just such a empowering experience where I felt like I got to really be so connected with my body and my baby, and Nick wasn't exhausted or tired, and my providers were on my team, just fully supporting my body doing what it needed to do. I don't think that home birth is necessarily the right decision for every single person, but if you did want to hear kind of the dichotomy between a hospital experience when you want a natural birth and a home birth experience, maybe this helps you just kind of get a better idea of what those experiences could be like. Obviously, no two experiences are identical, and some people have had way better hospital experiences than me, and some people have had way worse home birth experiences than me. So I don't want to discredit anyone else's experiences, but those are my experiences. They're both very cool and very empowering in their own ways. But at the same time, I definitely am biased toward home birth for myself at this point, because oh my gosh, it was amazing. I loved it so much. So those are my birth stories. I hope that was a fun listen for you. It's always fun for me to get to retell that, and it makes me kind of emotional thinking about how I have 2 toddlers now who are running around like feral savages in my house, and I brought them into this world in those ways. So thank you for being here today on the podcast. You can always DM me your questions on Instagram if you have any, and I look forward to seeing you guys back for the next episode of the OrganiMama Podcast. Hey friend, thanks for listening to today's episode of the OrganiMama Podcast. If you're looking for more ways to dive deeper into low-tox living, I want to tell you about my OrganiGuides. In 2024, I wrote a series of digital guides that walks you through exactly how to rid your home of toxic possessions and chemicals, from kitchen equipment to bedding to paint to baby toys to your clothes and accessories. You'll learn exactly what materials and ingredients to avoid, what materials and ingredients are safe, and which brands and products I recommend as good, healthy options for your family. Listeners of the OrganiMama podcast can get 20% off any of my Organic guides using code PODCAST. And I've linked all the guides in the show notes for you below. As always, do your best and let go of the rest. Bye for now.